Thank you so much for coming out at 9 in the morning to our presentation, Empowerment Playbook, Making and Measuring Change in the Games Industry. My name is Stephanie Fisher. This is Alison Harvey. And we've been conducting research on inclusivity-focused organizations since 2011, and we're thrilled to be speaking about our most recent work with you at GDC. In this presentation, we'll be talking about the different kinds of impact that community-based groups are making, and how to communicate this impact in a way that is driven and informed by consent, safety, and privacy. So, we've divided our presentation into 4 parts. First, I will be providing some context and information on who Pixels is and how we came to be. Next, Alison will talk about our research project on measuring Pixels' impact. Then she will describe a visualization tool that was developed by Soft Chaos to show how we can visualize change and impact in an interactive way. And then I will end with sharing some of Pixel's strategies that guides the work that we do. Okay, so first, who is Pixels? Pixels is a small, Montreal-based nonprofit organization that works to improve gender diversity in the games industry. Our mission is to provide game makers with space and support to reach their game-making goals, whether that's honing their craft, improving their hireability, or increasing their confidence. But to really understand the impact that Pixels has made, you have to understand the history of how Pixels came to be and why we exist in the first place. So, to that end, let me take you back a decade to 2013, which is the year that Pixels was born. So in 2013, the games industry was 40 years young, and like its player base, it was overwhelmingly white, male, and straight. In addition to this homogeneity of the industry, equity and diversity was not considered a priority. So for example, in the 2014 IDGA Developer Satisfaction Survey, when asked, do you feel there's equal treatment and opportunity for all in the games industry, 47% of respondents said yes. No. 28% said yes, and 25% answered not sure, not applicable. So nearly half the workforce understood that there was an EDI problem. That's good. After all, you can't change what you don't know. But a quarter of the workforce was unsure or unaware of the problem, or kind of worse, knew that there was a problem but didn't see it as their problem. This was not a new issue by any means. Women have always been here making games. These kind of blurry clips are from a 1983 article from the now defunct Video Game Magazine, from an article that interviews 6 women in different roles at different companies. And throughout this article, the women are talking about how they love games and how they came to the industry, but the exclusionary culture of games can make working in this industry uncomfortable or even unwelcoming. And it's both fascinating and a little depressing to read this article and know that what they're saying rang true 30, even 40 years later. Okay, so back to 2013. We have an EDI problem, but thanks to social media, people are actually starting to talk about it. Discussions like #OneReasonWhy were bringing awareness to the challenges women game developers faced. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with One Reason Why, basically what happened is this one tweet set off one of the most personal and widespread conversations about women's experiences in the games industry today. And the tweet was, why are there so few lady game creators? Over the next 24 hours after that tweet, thousands of women shared their personal stories of sexism and exclusion. They were basically tweeting their one reason why there were so few women leaders in a massive and rapidly expanding industry. Women reported experiences ranging from just everyday sexism of working in a male-dominated industry to inappropriate sexual misconduct where perpetrators are protected by a culture of silence. The One Reason Why discussion was quickly followed by a second hashtag, One Reason to Be. And that discussion was where women talked about why they stayed in the industry despite all these one reasons why. And simply put, they stayed because they love making games. They love their job. And then rounding out this discussion was the hashtag One Reason Mentors. And that's where game developers volunteered to provide support to others interested into getting into the games industry. And so the unspoken understanding running through all these reasons conversations was that sexism in games was a universally acknowledged truth. And something needed to change. And maybe instead of focusing solely on how we can get more women into the industry, the question we should be asking is what needs to change to keep women in this industry? And my personal opinion, this would be a good place to start. If anything needs to change to keep more women in games, it should be eradicating misogyny. However, because the word feminism seems to scare the bejesus out of people, we've come to refer to the fight for gender equality in a more palatable way, as women's empowerment. Also in 2013, the women's empowerment movement was a hot topic in and out of tech. That was the year Sheryl Sandberg published her little book called Lean In. You might have heard of it. In Lean In, it's a part memoir, part manifesto, part self-help book. Sandberg offers this path for women looking to achieve professional success. Oh, Sheryl Sandberg is also a Facebook executive, for anyone who didn't know that. Lean In was, at the time, lauded as this very inspirational, modern feminist call to action, and in it, she encourages women not to hold back. She encourages women to be assertive at work, to speak up, empower themselves so they can achieve their full potential in all aspects of their life, both personal and professional. But what Sheryl Sandberg offers is actually an individual solution to a systemic problem. In her opinion, what needed to change was not the work environment, but the women themselves. And this rallying cry that she has puts the onus on women as individuals to empower themselves. And it actually also assumes that the environment will be receptive to changes that they want to make. Okay, so game culture is known for a lot of things, but being opening and welcoming to change is not really one of them, at least at this time. As those one reason why tweets remind us, women in this industry face a level of scrutiny that's not applicable to their male counterparts. In this industry, expressing an opinion as a woman can actually be kind of dangerous. Note that the next slide does contain some ugly language. So if you want to look away, you can. So example, also in 2013, GameSpot reviewer Carolyn Pettit, for example, wrote a review of Grand Theft Auto 5. It was one of the most anticipated games of the year. Carolyn's a huge fan of the franchise herself. She rated the game a glowing 9 out of 10. It was mostly a glowing review. However, she knocked off a point because of and criticized the game's portrayal of women. This sparked a very intense and angry backlash from angry fans. Her review attracted more than 20,000 comments, many of them hostile and transphobic, that have since been removed from the GameSpot website. And this is what's left, and it's still pretty bad. There's even a petition that aimed to get her fired, all for doing her job, expressing an opinion. Let's also not forget that just a year before, in 2012, angry gamers also lost their shit over the Tropes versus Women in Video Games Kickstarter campaign. And so while Lean In's advice to put yourself out there and take risks sounds great in theory and doable if you, like Sheryl Sandberg, are cloaked in white, heterosexual, cisgendered, upper middle class privilege, the reality is that the sexism and misogyny that permeates game culture can actually make it feel like it's impossible for us as individuals to change the status quo. And in many ways it is if we try to do it alone and by ourselves. So that's what it was like to be a woman in games in 2013. It's now 10 years later. EDI initiatives are everywhere, and they're still as important as ever. One only has to walk around GDC to see how large multinational companies are eager and showing up and eager to show how they are creating an inclusive games industry. But before those big players got onto the inclusivity train, indie game communities had actually been laying the groundwork to foster change through action for a couple of years, and they were doing this by building community. And so now we're going to get into the Pixel's origin story after that bummer of an intro. So in late 2011, a Toronto-based video game organization called the Hand-Eye Society decided they would run a small Women in Games incubator program, and they called it the Difference Engine Initiative, which I'm going to refer to as DEI because Difference Engine Initiative is kind of a mouthful. So the DEI had a modest goal, going to teach 10 women how to make their first game in 6 weeks. The response to DEI was overwhelming. It showed there was really high demand for women's-only programming and community space in Toronto. Shortly after the end of the program, the organization Dames Making Games, now simply known as DMG, was formed. And DMG's purpose was to take up this work started by the Hand-Eye Society, to create a space where women game makers could gather and meet others, to form community. DMG actively addressed issues of systemic marginalization and exclusion of women in game development in their city, and they did this through running women-only incubator programs, workshops, game jams. They invited mentors from the broader community, both men and women, to come share their skills and provide game-making support to first-time designers. And within a year, DMG changed the face of Toronto's indie game development scene forever. More importantly, for the purpose of this story, DMG really provided a model that other game development communities could use and adopt for their own local context. This is how Pixels came to be. So in January 2013, armed with some seed funding from a local university, the program curriculum developed by the Difference Engine Initiative and the community model developed by DMG, Pixels co-founders, Rebecca Cohen-Palacios and Tanya Short, ran the first Pixels game incubator program in Montreal. And just like in Toronto, same thing happened. There was a demand for women-focused programming and space. In Montreal, it was very high. The TGI received 64 applications for 10 spots. And that really inspired Rebecca and Tanya to create an online follow-along program that allowed anyone in the world to also make their first game alongside the incubator participants. And so the Pixels Game Incubator program was met with this influx of excitement, enthusiasm, and goodwill from the Montreal games community. Everyone was really happy it was happening. And you had so many people coming out to serve as mentors or offer other types of assistance. Everyone really wanted to support Pixels. And I guess inspired by this generosity of the community, as well as the participants from that first cohort of game makers, Rebecca and Tanya decided, hey, let's run a second game incubator program. Rebecca and Tanya also created a mentorship program that matched volunteer mentors, all the people that were coming out asking, how can I help? They matched those people with folks who were looking to break into the industry. And with those two programs, the incubator and this mentorship matching program, Pixels officially moved from being a one-off program to a grassroots group. And eventually, Pixels would incorporate in 2015 as an official nonprofit organization. And so the original Pixels Game Incubator actually continues to run today. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary last year. As our flagship program, it's supported over 200 game makers over the last decade, many of whom have gone on to work in the industry and continue to give back to games community, either through participating in Pixels or involvement with another community organization. And over the last decade, Pixels has grown and has steadily added new programming and tried other things. These new initiatives are usually driven by members of the Pixels community. By usually, I mean always, actually. What happens is somebody comes in with an idea, what they want to do, and we try to make it happen. And here are some of the programs that we're best known for. So we have monthly workshops. These are talks, hands-on skill workshops, and master classes led by game developers in our community. They are a source of free education and an opportunity for new leaders to practice their teaching and presentation skills in a friendly environment. We have a writing portfolio program. This program helps participants create written pieces through guided assignments and themed discussions. It gives them access to mentors and to critique groups. and with the intention to build a professional portfolio that they can use to apply for a game writing position. We have career accelerator programs. These are peer mentorship co-development groups that help women who feel stuck, overwhelmed, or burned out in their careers. These are guided by a third-party expert, and this program creates space to speak openly about career challenges. It facilitates group problem solving and strategizing and provides a vital peer network. GDC Ensemble is my personal favorite. It's a scholarship program that offers free all-access passes to GDC to mid-career game developers from all over the world. We offer peer support and financial assistance so participants of Ensemble can navigate this massive convention competently and safely. One of our newest initiatives are creator funds. These are grants and mentorship opportunities to marginalized creators in Canada. It's really just money. There's no recoup, no publishing or platform requirements. The past focus of our creator fund programs have included prototyping funds, finishing funds, supporting Black, Indigenous, and racialized creators, as well as creators from marginalized genders. And finally, we organize a lot of social events, like too many to list here, but we organize social events so members of our community can gather and be inspired by games and each other. Our alcohol-free and family-friendly tea parties are maybe what we're best known for. And these are opportunities for everybody, young and old, to learn and play games made by Canadian creators. And so Pixels, we've expanded our offerings significantly over the last 10 years, but we are still very much the same grassroots organization from 2013. We're self-organized, we operate at the local level, and we encourage other members of our community to come help us make change. This sometimes blows people's minds. We are completely volunteer run. This is nobody's full-time gig. We are run by a small army of directors, coordinators, and mentors who do this work for free and in our spare time. We strive to be maximally accessible. Our programs are free, and they will always be free. And we develop programming with marginalized members of our community, not for them. And so our mission statement is, Pixels is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering more women developers and improving gender diversity in the games industry. But what exactly do we mean by empower here? Whereas, Sheryl Sandberg's feminist empowerment was about women changing themselves to thrive in a broken system that normalizes the oppression of marginalized people, we view empowerment as a collective community-building activity. And so broadly speaking, Pixels fulfills its mission by providing support for women and other marginalized genders who want to make games. And we do this by creating spaces of belonging in games. That's what we do. And this is where you don't have to worry about how you're going to be treated in a gaming space because you're not a white, cisgendered, straight man. And while we refer to ourselves as a women in games organization because those are our roots and that's where we started, we pay a lot of attention to how gender, race, class, sexual identity, indigeneity, and differences in ability and socioeconomic status and other identities play a role in how we experience the world. We believe gender equity can't be achieved without attending to all those intersecting identities. Basically, intersectionality guides us in creating the kinds of support systems that are not readily accessible to many game developers in this industry. In addition to what we do what we can to create equitable, fair, and safe working environments for game makers outside of our own programs. And to that end, we are also pro-union and support workers' right to collectively organize. And so we know we're making a difference. The heartwarming messages we've received over the last 10 years have been truly humbling. And although advocacy work can be mentally and physically exhausting sometimes, it's also rewarding and renewing. And I draw my strength from this community, and I'm honored to serve it. And it might be a good time to actually say what I do for Pixels. My role is I'm a co-director, and my role is to handle our finances and our sponsorships. I'm the paperwork and spreadsheet nerd who keeps track of our numbers. actually love numbers. And a couple of years ago, I was pulling together an impact report for a sponsor, doing those things where you're like pulling the engagement analytics, and I'm counting up how many games have been made and how many people applied to our programs, how many people have attended our workshops. And it was just sort of overcome with irritation and annoyance, very randomly, about how Pixel's impact had been reduced to these numbers, because Pixel's impact is just so much more than those types of metrics, as impressive as they are. In our early years, we had actually created these things called ripple maps to visualize the impact of a program. And so this is an example of a ripple map visualization of the very first Pixel's Game Incubator program. And it tracks the activities of each participant over a 1-year period. So the inner circle are the games that were made as part of the incubator. The peach nodes just outside of it are games that participants made after the incubator. And the pink nodes at the end are community activities that they all participated in. And the lines between the nodes are the relationships between participants, demonstrating how they continue to collaborate and support each other even after the end of the program. And this is just 1 year. But Alison will talk a little bit more about that. As an organization with limited resources, Pixels, we're not able to do this kind of tracking and follow-up for every program as a static visual that also just does not lend itself to long-term tracking either. So as the 10th year anniversary of the incubator approached, in my annoyance with writing numbers-based impact reports running at an all-time high, I reached out to Alison to complain. And then I asked her for help to solve this problem. Alison had actually been, I'm going to embarrass you now, been very instrumental in securing the seed funding for the first incubator. And it was actually her idea to bring the DEI and DMG incubator model from Toronto to Montreal. And because of this, she knows the history, she knows the organization. I thought she would be the perfect collaborator for this project. Also, this is a picture of us a long time ago. We're very serious researchers. And for that, I'm going to hand it off to Alison.
All right, everybody ready for some research? Yeah. Morning research time. So as we saw, there's obviously been a sense that this kind of activity, this kind of inclusivity organizing has had an impact on the people who've participated. And there's been this desire to kind of visualize what that impact looks like. And so this is actually the first ripple map that I think ever existed. This is from the Difference Engine initiative that Steph reviewed. Again, just from those 2 incubators of less than 10 people making games, trying to think of what did these games, the creation of these games enable beyond that incubator into further networking or further events attended and organized. And there's a reason why people want to do this kind of tracking. Initially, it was because there was a sense that maybe there was no point to this kind of organizing. I know it's hard to believe now, but 10 years ago, there was some pushback against women in games groups. So initially, that was kind of the impetus behind this. But as time has gone on, there has been other needs for visualizing to kind of communicate the value of sponsorship, for instance, and funding, and to show stakeholders in the community and in the industry that there is a benefit to doing this kind of work. So people like visuals to do that kind of thing. However, that is actually a really difficult thing to do. It's really complex. For example, if you look at this other ripple map that's on the screen here that was created by Rebecca Cohen-Palacios, this is just 1 year of impact from one incubator. It's beautiful, but also, can you imagine? It's like a mess, right? It's a mess to try to do this. How unwieldy would a visualization look in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? This is where we are right now, it's 10 years. So we're trying to avoid this kind of visual noise, really. And the static ripple mapping kind of enables that visual noise. So we started to think about, well, we didn't. Una Lee, who was pictured in a previous slide, who was part of the Difference Engine initiative, started to think about, could we create a dynamic ripple mapping tool? So just for some context, Una Lee is a game designer, but also is part of the Design Justice Network. And no one would be better positioned to make such a thing than her. But actually, the project didn't end up progressing, right? It got into data collection, it got into some testing. But in the process of doing that testing, Una Lee and her team kind of discovered that these kinds of tools can be used for other purposes than what we're talking about, not just to celebrate the value of this kind of work, but also for instance, to document conspiracies of some sort, right? So there's other ways to use information about networks and influence and outputs. And we did see that with Gamergate. So in the end, that project was put aside because the question arose, like, how do we ensure that people who are participating want their data to be used in this way? And is there a way to easily withdraw your consent for participating? And this is where Unily went in doing this project, the Building Consentful Tech project, which I highly recommend. You can find the zine anywhere on your favorite social search engine tools, and also check out her website. In the zine, Lee and her collaborator, Dan Tolliver, proposed that we use an internet that's built on really coercive and skimpy forms of consent, like terms of service, terms of use. What might it look like to build technology from a perspective of consent that is actually, as it says here, freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific, where consent would drive everything, development, data storage, data access, and user interactions. So this is like quite a tall order, actually. It's a big task. We don't have great models for it. And in this moment of 10 years of Pixels organizing, we were like, this is a great time to turn to the community and ask these questions. Like, how do we collect this kind of data? How would we communicate this kind of data outwardly? Who are our audiences? How can we do it with consent right at the kind of core of how we're doing it? And that's why we did a research project that is a community-led research project. So where it's not centering the perspectives or hypotheses of a researcher, but all about where the community says we need to do. So here's the research. We turned to the community and we did 16 interviews asking them, what has the impact of Pixels been in your life? And just a little bit of background about who these participants are. They are all people who have been through Pixels programming, and the vast majority of them are not one-off kind of programming attendees, but people who attended something and then continue to participate in the community doing their own organizing. The majority of the people who participated work in the games, from AAA to indie, and they do a range of roles. They're founders, they're community managers, programmers, artists, designers. Only one person who participated never worked in games, didn't want to work in games, just thought this was like a really fun thing to do and didn't have any professional objectives. But most people are quite invested in games. And what's kind of interesting to me is where do these people come from to get into games? They have really diverse educational and career backgrounds. So some of them had technical forms of education, as you might expect, but others were coming from the social sciences and humanities. Yay, we have value. Some had more non-linear kind of roots into games. They were working in other fields completely before they got there. And what's interesting is that participating in Pixels isn't some sort of instrumental thing. It's not about like, I have a career goal necessarily, but it can change people's ideas of what their career can be. I always think of this as a key takeaway when we're talking about diverse people. They don't necessarily follow a very straight line into games, and it's really useful to look at where they're coming from to understand how do we include them more. So in these interviews, we heard about the importance of probably things that are not going to surprise you: internship opportunities, mentorship opportunities, game jams. These all scaffold people's goals and create opportunities, especially in indie games kind of trajectories. And of course, unsurprisingly, we heard a lot about how important Pixels has been in those journeys, as well as you can see from this quote on the screen. These stories of the origins of participants were really important to us because they indicated to us how people found out about Pixels, why they wanted to participate in it, and why they wanted to stay involved as well. So there's 16 unique stories, but there were some commonalities across these as well. Quite a few people came to Pixels right out of school, while they're navigating life changes like career transitions, and when you move to Montreal, because there's something about Pixels in Montreal, like you can't miss it once you're there. And so you find out about Pixels via social media, via word of mouth. But overall, it's kind of the sense that Pixels is always going to find you if you're interested in games. And in terms of motivations, people came to Pixels for a variety of reasons. This includes wanting to connect with the community and some social support, seeking skills development, professional networking, mentorship opportunities, and also for fun. Let's not forget, making games is fun for people. Also, we heard from a lot of people that they were looking for opportunities to build their confidence. That's kind of a key theme, actually, confidence building, because people talk about things like imposter syndrome. We all use this term. Barriers to entry as well. So those are things that drew people, but something I want to underline is also the word that Steph mentioned earlier. The feminist ethos of Pixels is something that attracts people to the organization. And that's because It's a women-only space, and it's driven by a kind of goal of inclusivity. And people have had past experiences that weren't informed by those kinds of values. A lot of spaces for gaming resemble the kind of historical ethos of the games industry. It's built on the same kind of demographics and attitudes that Steph mentioned, and those kinds of norms and expectations as well. Pixels offer something that doesn't really bear any resemblance to that. One participant said it's not a bro-y kind of space to be in. And these activities are seen as valuable for creating a space where you feel comfortable also talking openly about sexism that you've experienced. And a lot of people talked about how, yeah, it started from a women in games perspective, but it has shifted to emphasizing marginalized genders in games, right? So that it is constantly working towards a more inclusive kind of space. People also come to Pixels because it's positive and beginner friendly, which makes it really easy for people to ask questions and ask for help. It's also not about forcing those outcomes of like making games, even though that's what we see a lot in the Ripple maps. You don't have to complete a game. You don't have to bring it to market. It's not for that. It's a welcoming space that isn't intimidating. It's open to people who don't have coding backgrounds and also to people who have more experience or self-taught skills. All you need to join is a shared interest, and that makes you a peer, and that makes you feel like you can belong in that space. Another attraction is that Pixels demystifies what it is to work in games. It opens up the idea of what a career in games can be and makes it more accessible. As one participant said, it made me realize that people like me make games. And something that is really attractive to people is that Pixels participants stay involved in the community. There's not like a one and done kind of mentality when you're there. And that's because Pixels is non-judgmental and open to trying and failure. And that includes proposing events, proposing activities, proposing to lead something new. And so if it doesn't work out, that's not a big deal. And that kind of is an overarching ethos within Pixels. You can take on a leadership role. You can try to make a game. It doesn't really matter if you achieve that goal or not in the end. And that enables buy-in from community members to be open to failure and that there's no rigid definitions of success. So you have a little sense of who participants were and why they want to come to Pixels. And now I'm going to talk to you about what impacts they described from being in Pixels, right? So beyond the I made a game, what else did they get out of being there? And I mentioned that it's really challenging to visualize, right? Like it gets really messy really fast. Also, what we realized was like, what is impact as we were doing this? Like, I think sometimes of a meteor hitting the Earth, that's impact. But what does impact actually mean? Well, it can mean a lot of different things, actually. So we kind of have grouped impact into 5 categories that you can see here. Only some of this can be captured in the raw numbers that Steph was talking about, like games made or numbers of jobs, one secured. Those things happen, but as we saw with the previous Ripple maps, there's often other things that are going on. There's collaborations formed. There's impacts that don't have a kind of number that can possibly be associated with it. So I'm going to give you a sense of how each of these break down, but of course they're a little bit overlapping too. So kind of maybe the most obvious one would be a very personal form of impact, which is what an individual gets out of being in Pixels. Sometimes it is getting a job, sometimes it is making a game, but also there is a lot of stories about personal growth and learning, especially learning new skill sets, overcoming learning curves, and combating feelings of isolation when you're struggling to reach a goal. So these are things that I don't really know how you could express it in raw numbers, but they're really, really important as well. Sorry. So just a couple of achievements that people mentioned here would be successfully completing a career transition, developing new skill sets in game development, in community organizing and leadership, and also, please tell me how you can visualize this, sustained healing from toxicity and harm that's been experienced in education and workspaces. And these personal impacts do lead to more professional forms of impact as well, and community forms of impact that I'll talk to you about now. So beyond the individual, there's also impacts that lead to this kind of sustained community that Steph talked about. And this is where people are supporting other people. People are mentoring other people. People are finding opportunities and sharing them. People are looking out for the goals of their collaborators and their friends. So most people who participate in Pixels stay in Pixels. And this creates this environment of a shared kind of value system for sharing and supporting each other. So this is not a singular individual kind of impact. It's something about an environment of mutual support and communal aid. And the kinds of words that people use to describe pixels are as follows: supportive, judgment-free, validating, respectful, mindful, intentional, positive, protective, trustworthy, action-oriented, and reciprocal. I think reciprocal is like a really important one. We heard that one quite a lot. We also heard like nice things like it's cozy and it's comfy. But overall, what's really important is this kind of feeling that the collective matters here, that it's not just about coming in, getting something for yourself and leaving, and helping to sustain a transfer of communal knowledge across people and over time. And that's why it helps combat against isolation as well. Of course, this does translate to professional impacts, right? So there's a couple, I can group them into kind of 4 categories. Pixels enables people to form connections with peers and also with experts in the workplace. And that leads to all kinds of those opportunities that I mentioned, the internship, the mentorship, but friendship as well. It's also sharing material resources, right? So Pixel shares learning materials for free. It shares funding for things like getting to GDC and covering transit costs. Another kind of benefit professionally that people talked about was it allows them, because there's this kind of solidarity and communal space, to mobilize those values from the Pixels community into their workplace. They feel like they can, stand up against injustice in the spaces that they work in because they know that there's kind of this collective mass behind them. And another kind of impact professionally is that, it creates this space where if you're struggling at work, you can come back to this community and ask those questions. You don't have to just flounder in the workspace. And the kind of fourth one that is a little bit more in line with the feminism thing is that there's also this feeling that it allows for the creation of the resistance. And this is the capital T, capital R. And this is how, the community members feel that they can collectively act against, norms that may be dark, norms that may be problematic, and that it enables them to kind of understand the value of, these kind of maybe academic concepts like intersectional feminism and the value of that for their actual working practices. This is, of course, deeply tied to industry, which is that these maybe more individual kinds of impact then translate into something a bit more structural too. So obviously, if you feel that you're empowered to take a position of resistance in the workplace, this means that you feel that you are able to claim space in the industry and maybe hold it accountable for problems. So it means it's not just about raising awareness, but it's actually thinking about how to mobilize and how to share the power across people in the industry too. So in many ways, Pixels raises expectations about what we should have when we work in the industry. And it connects to this other kind of way of being, which is paying it forward. Not just pulling that benefit from yourself, but paying it forward to other people in the industry as well. And that all translates to people, organizing these kinds of EDI initiatives in the workplace, like Women in Games and LGBTQ plus groups too. Overall, people didn't talk about this, but they've described this. This creates a cultural impact. This creates an impact that goes beyond Pixels. In some ways, it goes even beyond games, right? It's this idea that seeing is believing. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. Gina Davis likes to say it about girls in the media. But this idea that an organization being around for 10 years doing all this kind of work has changed the entire structure. Someone said that to me yesterday at the Women in Games International Party. Things do look different 10 years later. I'm not saying it's all Pixels. We'd love to take, no, they don't need to take all the credit, but that there is a shift in the culture as well. That we can, actually have higher expectations of what inclusion looks like in this space. So, great, yeah, lots of impacts. Actually, I have reams and reams of pages of people telling me all of these kinds of impacts, and many of them are overlapping, and it's great, but then I suddenly felt that I was not actually helping as much as I thought I was, because I'm like, what do I do now? Yeah, I've heard a lot from these interviews about what inclusivity organizing can do, what a community organization based on volunteer labor can do. And I also heard from participants that they do want to visualize this. They do want people to know outwardly what's going on and the value of making this kind of effort, as you can see from the screen here. So we have this project, and we know all we have to work with, kind of in a rigorous way, but not rigorous at all, is these quotes that people say on social media and some stats about engagement, for instance. So how do we turn that into something else? But this is community-led research, so I don't have to struggle by myself. Instead, we organize some co-design workshops. Who better to struggle with the problems of data and presentation than a bunch of game designers. I believe game designers can fix a lot of things, actually. So we did a kind of community consultation and co-design workshops with the community and asked them, what do we do next? Like, this is what we heard from you. Where do we go? Like, first of all, does this check? And also, where do we go next? And so we had this nice co-design workshop in August in Montreal, where we generated lots of interesting pieces of paper. We were working really low tech at this point. We had some poster board, we had some stickers, we had some markers, and people sat down and answered this question, like, how can or should we collect information about impact? And in many ways, this was really useful because it generated ideas like maybe we don't associate it with people at all. That would help with the problem of, would data be useful for people to get harassed, but like link it to programming instead. That could also be anonymous. We talked about, could you do like an opt-in system of consenting to participate or an opt-out system of participation? We also talked a lot about, like, is there a different visualization for different audiences, right? Like, is there just like a funder package where they're like, I don't care about the resistance or the culture, like just what are the numbers? And then, for other kinds of stakeholders. And people brainstormed some like really interesting and beautiful things and also asked us some really difficult questions about how do we ensure the safety of data over long periods of time too. And they came up with some like visual ideas too, like, do we think of this as chemistry, as about the formation of bonds? Because we are often using that metaphor of the ripple, but are there other kinds of metaphors that are more useful for visualizing? So again, we got a lot of good ideas, but again, I was like, now I have more reams of paper. What do I do? And this is where our partnership with Soft Chaos came in. So Soft Chaos is a video game cooperative made up of Pixel's community members in Montreal. So these are the game designers Alison Cole, Squinky, and Jess Marcotte. And thanks to some funding that we got from the Digital Justice Research Cluster at York, we were able to commission them, thank goodness, to help us start to make sense of this. There's like a visualization piece, but there's also a kind of data sorting piece, right? How could we, on the back end, input data, and how could other people, Pixel's participants, the over, many, many hundreds of people, input the data, and then how could that be translated into a visualization tool that is dynamic? So we gave them the problem and asked them to help us. And they share with us, first of all, they're involved in the community. They care about the community. And they also agree with the importance of consentful technology too. So what I want to do now is show you some of the stuff that came out of their prototype and the way that they took this away and envisioned something quite beautiful. And this is what informed our second co-design workshop. We actually showed this, we did another community consultation and had people respond to it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of, the data sorting and the UI. And if you want to try it out later, we have it with us as well. So what they thought about was taking all of this data and grouping it into moments. And moments would be documenting specific points in Pixel's history with its many impacts, but then grouping it according to those impacts from the perspective of either an individual or an organization, right? So you can see the different icons that they designed to represent it. And the idea is that little, that chain thing that you see, you go around and you collect those icons that represent moments. So these moments would then, if you click into them, contain types of impact, and then they would also be tagged with useful information like dates and locations. And also they created something that wasn't our idea at all, which is this continuing contribution piece, which asks who gave back to Pixels to make that moment happen, which is really useful because it kind of gets at that reciprocal thing that I would mention before that sometimes thinking about impact doesn't do. It spreads outward, but it doesn't necessarily think about looping back in, which is really obviously part of the success of this organization. So when you click on the moments, you would see the different types of impact that's associated. In this case, they've grouped them as community, personal, and professional, the more kind of individual ones. And this enables you to have different levels of interaction. You could just see oh, okay, there's some moments. Or you could go in and look at more like the stories, the data. In addition to that, they thought that there's a difference between those individual impacts and maybe more thinking of achievements. And that's how they organize larger scale cultural and industry impact. So in terms of the user interaction, what would happen is that a player should be able to collect those moments, and when they've collected a critical mass, they could get a pop-up that would give them a summary and then allow you to click in further to read about each individual form of impact, as you can see here. And this is what it looks like when you collect 5 and then you get that achievement. So we showed this at the second co-design workshop, and overall the community members were really enthusiastic about it because it gave you a sense of bonds, this bonding that is so important in the community. And people, we talked about like what kinds of data should we include, what kind of categories, but we also kind of had this outstanding question about accessibility, and that's something that we're still going to be grappling with moving forward. So this is a work in progress. I hope that's normal at GDC, right? But I hope it gives you a sense of, I guess, the kind of challenge of doing this work, right? Like, it's not that there isn't a ton of impact. It's just like, it's challenging to kind of actually express it and visualize it in a way that people can make sense of. So I'm going to turn it back over to Steph now, because she's going to talk to you about how do we pull this all together and have some key takeaways about empowerment.
Okay. Okay, so I guess, thank you, Alice. The biggest takeaway from this project so far is that numbers are useful, but they only tell one part of the story. And we can measure impact in other ways, like quality of life improvement, job satisfaction, career advancement opportunities, just to name a few. Although I will say one area where numbers matter is here in compensation and pay equity and transparency. This isn't ours. This is from the 2022 IDGA survey. And as you can see from their infographic, women and workers of color continue to work under precarious conditions. So just wanted to say numbers still matter, and let's work on closing that wage gap. Now, moving on. Okay, we've come a long way in 10 years, but the reality is there's still a lot of work that remains to be done. Although more women and minorities are working in the games industry, and there is indeed growing awareness of the inequities in the industry, as shown here. Again, the IDGA Developer Satisfaction Survey. Equal opportunities are still out of reach for many. And hiring more developers from underrepresented groups doesn't really matter. It doesn't mean anything if those people don't have opportunities for advancement and they end up leaving. So now, I'm not an expert in improving workplace culture, but lucky for you, there is somebody who's speaking at GDC tomorrow who can tell you how to do that, and it's tomorrow at 2 p.m., and you should all go check out Anita's talk. I will see you there. But as promised, we promised some sort of empowerment playbook, so here it is. As we wrap up our presentation, I'm going to share some suggestions and strategies that inform how Pixels creates inclusive spaces and programs. This is really directed at allies who want to help. So first and foremost, please need to understand that marginalized groups know what they need from allies. Like, don't go in there and assume you know how to make things better for marginalized game developers. Work with your community members and let them drive the action. Second, understand that these are people's lives and livelihoods that we're talking about here. So treat equity and advocacy work with the same respect and care as you would your revenue-generating activities, not like some sort of little side project. Third, inclusivity work requires material supports. You can't just build this out of nothing. And you get what you give, so invest time, money, and resources into it. And on that note, this is labor. This is a lot of work. So either pay the people who are involved in doing it, or if you're already paying them and they're, it's an internal initiative of your company, release them from other duties so they have the time to fully participate in this work. And on that note, I think we should all be mindful that marginalized game devs are often overburdened with being asked to carry out EDI work. And many of us are passionate about helping the communities we belong to, and we should absolutely be involved, obviously, but sometimes we don't have the capacity to take on another thing at this time. There's only so many hours in the day. So if you want to work with someone, respect their time and their timelines for doing it. Fourth, your visibility is not a priority in this. It's not about you or amplifying yourself. It's about amplifying that community that you're trying to work with. And, I guess everything that I'm saying is really about decentering yourself. Your EDI activities should benefit and center the needs of that community. If you're looking to partner with a community organization or group, listen to what they have to say and how you can help them achieve their goals. And if you listen and you think, that's unreasonable, then think about why you're uncomfortable with what they're asking you for. Why are you uncomfortable with that suggestion? And just sit with it for a while, Sitting in discomfort and being self-reflexive of why you're not comfortable can provide you with some really useful information. This is hard work, and some of the hardest work is internal. It involves recognizing how you're contributing to maintaining the status quo. And I'm not perfect. Pixels is not perfect. We don't exist in some kind of vacuum or magical space that is immune to sexism, racism, transphobia, or classism. We are just as enmeshed in these systems of oppression as any game studio. And we just talked for almost 50 minutes about how amazing we are. But for all that praise that we've also received some very much needed criticism. For example, we have been called cliquey, insular, and super white. And while, we don't feel like, I don't feel like I'm Regina George. I don't feel like I'm any of these things. That's not the point. The point is that there are some people who see us like that, and they see us being exclusive, and that's the problem. And so, we're all contributing to inequity in some way. So just acknowledge that and then commit to changing it. Okay, so when we talk about empowerment, we tend to bury the lead, which is power, And in conclusion, I guess to paraphrase a major thread of Black feminist thought, empowerment is achieved through building community and solidarity across differences. And so I guess the secret to making and measuring change lies in collective and communal power. And so the real empowerment playbook is actually the one that we write together. But that's another talk and probably for a future GDC. And in closing, I just want to acknowledge the other community organizations who are also working to change games, like Game Devs of Color Expo, Latinx in Gaming, I Need Diverse Games, DMG, Queerness in Games Con, Indigenous Game Devs, and these are just a few. And Pixels is so proud to be a part of this ecosystem of inclusivity-focused community organizations. We are extremely humbled by the positive feedback we've received over the last 10 years. And I am grateful for the opportunity to continue to do this work with and for such a fantastic community and to be able to share our story with all of you today. So thank you. That's a video of the Soft Chaos prototype. It's also a really great cat toy. So we have time for a couple of questions, if anyone has any. And we'll answer them to the best of our ability. Oh, yeah. You have to come up to the mic. And while we're doing that, and I will repeat the question, or Allison will repeat the question, depending on who you're asking.
So partway through your first section, you mentioned a writing portfolio program. I was caught and engaged by that because I haven't really seen many ways to implement game writing into a portfolio, and I might check that out. I'd like to hear more about it.
Oh, yeah. So the question was, talk a little bit more about the writing portfolio program. Thanks for the question. That's actually such a really great example of a program that came out of a perceived need. Like you said, there's not a lot of that. And so it was started by a participant of the Game Incubator program who made a game, and they really, they were an excellent writer, and they wanted to be a narrative designer. And they thought, they got a job in the games industry and thought, I want to help other people get a job in the same way I did. So it started as sort of the same as the Game Incubator program, where people would meet, aspiring game writers would meet. I think it was once every 2 weeks for a couple of months to co-develop and critique each other's work. And it was quite successful. It was started local in Montreal. And then there was such a demand, two things happened. There was such a demand for it. And then the pandemic forced it to really move online. And so went from being a local sort of writing incubator program to this portfolio program, where it's basically the same thing. Anyone in the world can sign up to be a part of it. And I think they use Slack. Sorry, I don't really run the program, so I don't know the actual details, but they do use something to get together and engage with each other and provide critique. They critique each other's work, and they bring in guest mentors and guest speakers who can also critique your work. And the whole point is to build a portfolio that you can then use to apply to a games job. That's it in a nutshell. It's actually just ending right now. It runs when the coordinators have time. I can't promise when it'll run again. A lot of our programs actually run when somebody has the capacity and the time to do so. But if you sign up for our newsletter, you will be informed of when the next one runs. And hopefully, because it's one of our most popular programs, hopefully it'll run again soon.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm curious, how do you decide where to draw the line of who can participate in this community? Because you talked about intersectionality. There's so many people to support for different reasons, and when we're creating a community for a certain group, we might be excluding maybe another group. So I'm curious if you've struggled with that.
Yeah, so the question is, what? Yeah, so the question is, where do you draw the line for participation? And so I will say, Pixels in general as an organization is open to everyone of all genders, all game makers. Programs are very specific, and they're usually tailored towards a specific group. So for the incubator, for example, it's people who have never made a game. And we keep that one women only because we recognize that women need their own space. Yeah, for events, everybody's welcome, but they must adhere to our safer space policy, for example. So, we don't exclude anybody, but if you're behaving badly and, you're oppressing other people in the space, we will, we don't tolerate that. But yeah, programs are really, they're really designed to help, I guess, a very specific group of people. And so it doesn't make the decisions any easier when accepting applicants. It's actually really hard to do so. But we try to curate programs with participants where we can feel like they can actually also help each other out. So for example, GDC Ensemble, it's an international program, and it's for mid-career developers. We do get specifically post this is what we're looking for, women and people who identify with belong to a marginalized gender with at least 3 years of experience, are parents of small humans, and come from a country that does not have an existing support system. And if we see in the pool of applicants, for example, a couple of years ago, there were 3 applicants from the Philippines, and we thought that'd be great if we could take all 3 and they can support each other in the process. Getting visas. When they come here, there's, in their own little group, somebody that understands where they're coming from. So they're, we're trying to build little support groups within our support group. But it is hard. It really is hard. I actually dread looking at applications because, if you take 25 people, you feel really bad for 26 and 27. Everyone absolutely deserves to go and participate in these programs. I think we have time for one more. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you guys for sharing your knowledge, and thank you guys for the efforts of making equity in the game industry. I do have a question for Dr. Harvey about the interviews you made for the marginalized people in the Pixels. I would love to, would you mind share more technical details of the art question for the interview? How was the qualitative analysis done? And do you have any future plans for more interviews about the marginalized people from Pixels?
So this was a research question. Thank you. I'm in a totally different place than I normally am. And the question was about, I guess, methodology, how the research was conducted, and then also future plans. So I want to talk about the future plans, but I'll answer your question really fast about how the methodology was. We recruited, this is the easiest study to recruit for ever because it's about the community. So people in the pixels were recruited. And you did the recruitment actually. And it was kind of targeted to people who had been around for a while, but as I mentioned, there was one that, she was like, I was just here to make a game because that sounds like an interesting thing to do on the side of doing archery and other things. And the questions were, we kind of came up with those categories of personal, community, industry, and professional. So we kind of asked those questions and asked also about kind of long-term versus short-term, because we thought maybe that would be one way that visualizing would be interesting. We asked about, why would it be important to communicate? What would be the value of communicating outward? And what would be the concerns around it? And then, we're still kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of analysis, so this is kind of quick analysis, but what was really, really interesting was the cultural impact part was not a question that we asked, right? So there's people, that's the kind of stuff that from a research perspective is interesting, right? Like that is definitely emergent from the participants, and also the kind of observation that it's difficult to parse. Personal impacts, if you're in a community, are community impacts in a lot of ways. So creating those fine lines is, for the purposes of presentation here, useful, but not actually how people live their life. Future research, so many things. Every single person who participated was like, you should do a study on X. Pixels operates out of Montreal, which is in a French province, but it's English and French in practice in Montreal. There's lots there about language-based inclusion. I think I'm quite interested in that. Thinking about like the next 10 years of programming. We got lots of like those kind of internal criticisms too, like how to make pixels more inclusive as well. Thinking about people who don't participate in pixels and why that is. There's lots of future research. We want to keep going with this. And so I know that the like visualization tool stuff was a bit rough and ready, but we're really interested in seeing if we can keep progressing with this tool and like make something fully functional that the community can use really easily. So, I would say those are the next steps. Did you have anything to add to that?
No, just that we're over time.
We're over time. We're going to go to breakout room around the corner. Julia is going to help us find it if anybody wants to play around with the tool, because we do have a little bit of functional UI that was like brand new as of 2 days ago. So if anybody wants to play with it, please do come by. Thank you so much for coming.